What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Tuesday, September 14th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 12-game slate tonight, and I have a bunch of fantastic picks for you. So let's take a look at the pitcher position. I like Jose Berrios with a 3% pitching advantage over the Tampa Bay Rays. Jose Berrios is only giving up a .620 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 4 righties here tonight. On top of that, the Rays have only hit 3 of his last 31 pitches. That's a .097 batting average. He's 9,400 FanDuel salary, 400 more on DraftKings, projected at 19.9 fantasy points here tonight, but that projection is way too low. He should score 30 fantasy points or more in this one. He has an ERA of 3.52. His record is 11-7 on the season, pitching an average of 95 pitches per game, averaging 34 fantasy points per game, and he's been on fire, scoring 48, 42, and 64 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jose Berrios here versus the Tampa Bay Rays. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Matt Olson with a 25% batting advantage over Jackson Kowar. Matt Olson is batting a .807 OPS versus righties, and Jackson Kowar, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 28% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.119 OPS versus lefties. Matt Olson is 2 for 2 with a 2.5 OPS versus Kowar, and he's 4,000 FanDuel salary, 1,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's been on fire, scoring 22, 19, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Matt Olson here versus Jackson Kowar. I also like CJ Cron with an 18% batting advantage over Touki Toussaint. CJ Cron is batting 17% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .931 OPS versus righties, and Touki Toussaint, he's batting a .834 OPS versus righties, and he's 1 for 2 versus Toussaint with a 1 OPS. He's 3,400 FanDuel salary, 900 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 3, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like CJ Cron here versus Touki Toussaint. Now I got a value play for you. Take a look at Jake Lamb with a 47% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Drew Rasmussen. Jake Lamb bats 8% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .683 OPS versus righties, and Drew Rasmussen, he pitches his worst ball by far to lefty batters, 39% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .900 OPS versus lefties. Now I like this pick because Jake Lamb is only 2,200 FanDuel salary and only 100 more on DraftKings, so I like that price on both sites. Now he's only averaging he's projected at 6.8 fantasy points here tonight, only averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season, but he scored 25 and 26 fantasy points in the last 2 games, so he could be catching fire here in a great matchup and super low salary. So I like Jake Lamb here versus Drew Rasmussen. Another value play that I like on this slate is Cody Bellinger with a 54% batting advantage over Luke Weaver. Cody Bellinger is batting 28% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .727 OPS versus righties, and Luke Weaver, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 26% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .991 OPS versus lefties. I like this pick because Cody Bellinger is 4 for 8, batting .500 with a 1.850 OPS versus Weaver. 2 of those 4 hits are for home runs. And he's only $2,400 FanDuel salary. He's $2,200 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. Projected at 9.9 fantasy points here tonight. Now he's been struggling, only averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. But he scored 6, 12, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And he's got a great matchup here tonight. So I like Cody Bellinger here versus Luke Weaver. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. Here's another value play for you. I like Tony Kemp with a 72% batting advantage over the low salary pitcher Jackson Kowar. Tony Kemp is batting 44% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .752 OPS versus righties, and Jackson Kowar, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, giving up a 1.119 OPS versus lefties. That's 28% worse than his other pitches. And Tony Kemp is 1 for 1 with a 2 OPS versus Kowar. He's only $2,200 FanDuel salary, $1,800 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 3, and 15 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Tony Kemp as a value play, especially on FanDuel, here versus Jackson Kowar.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
I also like DJ LeMahieu with a 45% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Alexander Wells. DJ LeMahieu is batting a .854 OPS versus lefty pitchers, and Alexander Wells, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 46% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.241 OPS versus righties. DJ is 1 for 2 with a 1.5 OPS versus Wells. He's $3,600 FanDuel salary, $600 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 4, 18, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like DJ LeMahieu here versus Alexander Wells. Okay, who do we have at the third base position? I like Isaiah Keener-Falefa with a 25% batting advantage over Zach Greinke. Isaiah Keener-Falefa is batting a .661 OPS versus righties, and Zach Greinke, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 36% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .835 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Isaiah Keener-Falefa is 7 for 15, batting a .467 batting average, and a 1.067 OPS versus Greinke. He's $2,800 FanDuel salary, $900 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 25, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Isaiah Keener-Falefa here versus Zach Greinke. Okay, who do we have at the shortstop position? I like Carlos Correa with a 3% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Jordan Lyles. Carlos Correa is batting a .760 OPS versus righties, and Jordan Lyles, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 9% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .890 OPS versus righties. Carlos Correa is 4 for 10, batting .400 with a .900 OPS versus Lyles. He's $3,600 FanDuel salary, $1,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 16, 0, and 0 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Carlos Correa here versus Jordan Lyles. I also like Kyle Seager with a 35% batting advantage over Luke Weaver. Corey Seager bats 8% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .902 OPS versus righties. And we know Luke Weaver pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 26% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .991 OPS versus lefties. And Corey Seager is 4 for 8, batting .500 with a 1.181 OPS versus Weaver. He's $3,600 FanDuel salary, only $600 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 19, and 0 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Corey Seager here versus Luke Weaver. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. Here's my dong of the day pick, my home run hitter. I like Bryce Harper with a 44% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Adrian Sampson. Bryce Harper is batting 16% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.048 OPS versus righties. And Adrian Sampson, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 28% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .930 OPS versus lefties. Bryce Harper is $4,400 FanDuel salary, $1,700 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's been on fire, scoring 22, 25, and 13 fantasy points in his last 3 games. Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Bryce Harper here versus Adrian Sampson. Now another guy who I think can hit a home run here tonight is Aaron Judge with a 51% batting advantage over the low-salary pitcher Alexander Wells. Aaron Judge, he bats 4% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .924 OPS versus lefties. And Alexander Wells, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 46% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.241 OPS versus righties. Aaron Judge is 1 for 2 with a 1 OPS versus Wells. He's $4,100 FanDuel salary, $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 29, 0, and 41 fantasy points in his last 3 games, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Aaron Judge here versus Alexander Wells. Okay, now here's a value play. I like Adubel Herrera with a 38% batting advantage over that same low salary pitcher, Adrian Sampson. Odubel Herrera is batting 10% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .758 OPS versus righties, and we know Adrian Sampson pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 28% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .930 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Sampson yet, and Odubel Herrera is only $2,500 FanDuel salary, although he's $2,400 more on DraftKings. I love that FanDuel price. Projected at 10.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 22, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Odubel Herrera here versus Adrian Sampson.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.